Amanda grew up on a cash crop and beef feedlot, which, along with earning a Bachelor of Commerce, a commercial in agricultural business honours at the University of Guelph, has built the foundation for a career in Ontario agriculture. Amanda is currently the Director of Commercial Financial Services, specialising in agriculture, and has spent the best part of 20 years with RBC, working on developing solutions to help her farm clients achieve their business and financial objectives. Community involvement is part of her DNA and has played an active role in various agriculture committees and boards. Amanda and her husband Steve, along with their 3 daughters, Madison, Haley, and Ava, currently own and operate a dairy farm and small Angus seed stock business near Tara, Ontario, the heart of Bruce County. So over to you, Amanda.
Perfect. Thanks, James. And everybody can see just my single slides?
Yes, we can.
Yep. Perfect. All right. Thanks very much, and appreciate the introduction and appreciate the invitation to join tonight. So just going to take a little bit of time to talk about, as Mike alluded to, kind of what we look at for banking and some of the tricks and trades that I've learned over the last probably one of the most and challenging times have been actually on our own farm. And here's what happens is this is where me and my husband live right now with our girls, like James said. And the short story is, number of years ago, my husband made the decision to leave his family farm. And so at that time, we ran a number of different situations. I'd been working at the bank for a few years at that time, and I started to develop a business plan, and we ran several different options. But the gist of it was that my husband really enjoyed dairy, and he really couldn't see himself doing anything else. So at that point, we applied to the new entrant program with Dairy Farmers of Ontario, and were successful in winning the lottery, as what I would call it, although it's the only lottery that I've won that I've had to borrow $1 million and not receive $1 million. So we had to put together a business plan, and at that point, it really kind of got real on not only for applying for the program, but what the bank needed to see. So one would think, right, I have access to all sorts of information. I have also access to all sorts of different farms that I see on a daily basis. And it became very, very clear that, that to borrow the kind of money that we needed to get started, we could not be average. And so when we took average numbers, it just wasn't going to work. We had to essentially be above average. So from there, yeah, so like I was saying, we decided to, for the amount of debt that we had to take on, we essentially had to be above average. And so how did we quantify that? How did we ensure that was going to happen? And so one of the things that that we got very, very good at was being very, very detail orientated. And so obviously, being a banker, I love numbers, and so I probably have more Excel spreadsheets around here than you can count on. But you know, when we built the barn, and this exactly is hanging in our office, and it's a thing that I live by. I talk to my clients about it, and the reality is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so when we talk about what defines our success, and success is different on every farm has a different measure of success, but on ours, it was really ensuring that that we were going to build a viable operation moving forward. And so I think what happens is that when we put things into context, it really comes down to the little things that that we do every day really do matter. And so, you know, we fast forward, and so when I look at, here's what my banker looks like, or what my banker looks at. And so there's essentially 3 categories that I focus on with our clients and on our own operation. And so the first one would be essentially defining who you are. So it's important that you communicate to your lender if you're a custom feedlot, if you're an owner operator, and actually even more if you do a blend. And so because essentially different capital is required if you're custom feeding versus owning. And then if you're doing a blend of that, we really need to understand the cattle flow, understand the cycle. So the more communication you can do, the better. Obviously, we look at areas on your farm that you kind of go above and beyond. And so it's about promoting your product and about promoting your farm and your business to everyone that comes aboard. So on your farm, do you do something above and beyond just actually feeding cattle? So are you part of the Ontario Corn Fed program? Are you part of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef? Do you have Verified Beef Plus? All of these things we look at. And I would say that, you know, in this bubble of what I would rate our clients on, and there's different notch systems, then, you know, we say, right, do you do one of those? Do you do two of them? Do you do 3 out of 5 of the options? And so those really come into play when we look at, are you doing something above and beyond just feeding cattle? Are you taking it that extra step? And kind of what I'm talking about is what Mike alluded to at the end about your scorecard. So I spend, like Mike alluded to, I do this every annual review meeting with my clients. They know exactly how they are rated. Their risk rating plays into their pricing. It plays into their access of capital, and so that's really what we concentrate on. So what I'm going through is essentially what that scorecard looks like. So the production parameters, obviously, we look at different parameters for different industries. So, for example, on the feedlot side, we look at average cost of gain and we look at feed conversion. So depending on the situation, it doesn't need to be a fancy spreadsheet. It doesn't need to be, it can be written on a piece of paper. But what I really want to know is, can you calculate that? Can you calculate your cost of gain? And I think it's very important to know that different clients will have different ways of calculating it. So cost of gain can be two things. It can be just legitimately your pounds and your feed, right? You know, more of a closeout or an inclusive way to look at it is, does it include your trucking? Does it include your vet? Does it include any sort, obviously your interest cost? Does it include yardage? That's probably a more fulsome approach that we would look at is your true profit per head, right? You know, rather than cost of gain. So remind you, there's two different things that we look at that way. And yeah, like I said, it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be, you know, in a big fancy program, but we really just need to know that you can articulate that. And then after we talk about our market and competitiveness and what we're doing above and beyond our peers in our group, it's really good for me to understand your management. So how do you come to those management decisions? What makes you, you know, pull the trigger on selling cattle or forward contracting that crop? So a couple of things that we look at is like we talked about before, is understanding that cost of production. And not only that, having your ability to monitor that. So, you know, feed conversion, right? The longer we leave them on feed, the heavier they get. Our conversion goes down. You know, should we have pulled the trigger and sold those cattle 30 days before? How does that impact our price? So those are the kinds of conversations that we have with our clients. And then we obviously want to know who's on their business advisor team. So one of the things that my husband and I sat down when at the very early days, and we realized, right, we cannot be everything to everyone. Uh, on your farm, you are pulled in 15 different directions. So you can't be a bookkeeper, and you can't be a crop specialist, and you can't be a vet, and you can't be an accountant, right? And so that's why we all have to find these people that we trust, and trust isn't built instantaneously, right? It takes time, and that's where, you know, you want somebody that's in your corner that can always work with you. You know, so you know, on our farm and being on the dairy, you know, the vets at our farm every 2 weeks, we're scheduled herd health. Our nutritionist comes in all of the time, or not all of the time, but comes in approximately every 6 weeks. We sample our feed, we do bunk adjustments and measurements to make sure that we're on track with where our feed's going, those types of things. And those business advisors are so important to you, right? Actually, Mike and I have known each other for quite a long time, and we both sat on CAFA, which is the Canadian Association of Farm Advisors Board. And during that time, I always used to say, like, I can always call an accountant, a lawyer, you know, kind of free of charge. So what I would say is find those people that you can pick up the phone and call and really become allies of your business. The other thing I'd say too, and you know, how many times do you talk to your banker? That really depends on how the complexity of your business, right? Maybe it's once a year, maybe it's twice a year. maybe it's monthly, right? It really depends on how much you look for, but really use them. The one thing that I'm so grateful for is that I have the opportunity to not only see different beef files, but I see dairy and hog and cash crop, and you can see so many different ideas and philosophies. And so, bend their ear. They're there to work for you, right? So that's what I would say with that. And then I always get some laughs and some smirks when I say, so how about those projections? And for a long time they'd always say, well, you tell me, Amanda, what the price of cattle is going to be in 6 months and I'll complete a projection. But the idea of projections is yeah, there's the top line revenue, but what we really want to know is where's your cost of production? Do we foresee any sort of capital expenditures this year? So probably trading equipment, we can handle that through cash flow, but are we looking at a barn expansion? Are we looking at a farm purchase? Are we looking at, succession planning? Do we have to pay out another generation? So there's all those types of things that when we talk about projections and we talk about what we need to see, those are some of the things. And there's a very big difference between maintaining and expanding. And so one of the things that you'll realize, and for those of on the call who've perhaps expanded in the cattle or built a barn, the barn is really only one part of it, right? The barn is a capital expenditure, there's no question, but then you've got to fill the barn, and filling the barn comes with a lot more operating line. And so what does that look like? How quickly do we fill the barn? And again, work with your accountant, work with your banker. They'll all have spreadsheets, they'll all have things that we don't need to go and reinvent the wheel, but we need to all be kind of on the same page when we look at things. And so then after we assess management, we really look at how our clients manage their risk. And risk management is obviously a huge part because despite being a farmer, I am a banker and I look at everything in the event of default. And so I always look at this and I say, there's oftentimes we find ourselves in situations that we never expected. And so this picture was taken 2 nights ago when I was in the barn and everybody had vacated and it was myself in the barn, and I found a heifer stuck in between the bars. And so I sit here and I think to myself, what could that heifer have done differently not to get herself in this situation? And so when we talk about risk management, I think, and Mike alluded to it, is we learn and adapt by making mistakes and then changing it how we do that. So the one thing I always want to ask my clients is, how do they evaluate their business risks and what are their risks on their farm? Because every farm will have different risks. Size of your farm, depending, if it's mom and dad and child, right? Probably HR or employees aren't that much of a risk. Somebody who's feeding a lot of cattle and have 10, 12, 14 employees, that adds a lot more risk to their business. And then obviously we've got the main ones we've touched upon, and production, commodity prices, input costs, rising interest rates we'll talk about in a little bit. So, and then we have all of the things outside of our control, policy, environmental regulation, trade. And so what are the things on your farm that you do to mitigate those? And right now it might seem very overwhelming and daunting, but a lot of these are what you do kind of second nature, right? So for instance, commodity pricing, right? If you're selling your crop, very few of my clients would sell it all at one time, right? So, it's the same as buying replacement cattle. If you buy all your cattle on the same market, you should really hedge out that risk, right? The more times you buy cattle on the market, you're going to get the highs, you're going to get the lows. Same with forward booking commodities. The more times you're on the market, the more time, you might not get the highest rate, but overall we'll average. And so those are the types of things that we talk about when we're looking at risk mitigation. We touched a little bit. Accrual financial statements are a must, because when we think about cash-based accounting is usually because we as farmers do not want to pay tax. I cannot lend you money if you do not make money. And so I always talk to our farmers about, we go out before our year end and we're prepaying a bunch of expenses, and all of a sudden, that cash base actually shows as an expense. we have accrual base. It shows us as a prepaid. It shows as an asset on our balance sheet. And so, so those types of things in my line of work, in my field, that is a must. If you truly want to understand yourself and understand where your farm is going, we need accrual financial accounting. I'll touch just quickly on some key financial ratios, and these are the three things that I would look at in the feedlot sector. First and foremost, and I've actually put some percentages there, so it would actually show you what the weight on and the importance of it. Working capital, cash, cash is king. 50% of your rating is based on how good your working capital is. And so when we talk about how we structure debt, you know, we want to what we call purify our operating line. So we want our assets, so which are our current assets, which are our inventory and our receivables. We want them paying our current liabilities. Our current liabilities are our operating debt, our payables, and our current portion of long-term debt. So the principal that is due in the next fiscal year. That is so things that impact our working capital, putting large amounts of equipment on our line, right? All of a sudden, our operating line goes higher without an adjusted inventory balance. And so those types of things then deplete our working capital. And so those are the questions that call your lender, ask them what they think. You know what, there's been some times we've had some healthy margins in the feedlot sector right now. And so probably, you know what, if you want to roll, if it's $50, $100, $200,000 trade of equipment, it's probably not going to impact your working capital that much, depending on the size of your farm. But that being said, again, should be a conversation with your lender. Debt servicing ratio. And so because we know that in the feedlot sector, we are all cyclical. And so we understand ebbs and flows of the industry. So we look at a 3-year average. And so we take the highs and the lows and average it out and get some sort of a consistency to your cash flow. And then that's to your principal and interest payments. So that's about 25%. And then obviously the balance sheet comes into play. And so I often have times where, you know, people ask, well, you know, I've got all this equity, you know, how come the bank's concerned about cash flow? And so there's always the first way out on the bank being repaid is from cash flow. And so that's from generating your income, from your generating profits from your business. Our secondary out is selling an asset, but nobody wants to do that. And so what the strength in the balance sheet does and what the equity in our business plays is it obviously gives us a lot more flexibility when we hit those highs and when we hit those lows of the industry, right? When we hit something that we're not expecting, when we hit a weather failure, we have health issues in the barn, you know, even so much as sometimes probably in the last 6 months dealing with rising interest rates. So we'll have a look at that. And so, but one thing I will say, if you are not 100% comfortable with these, you tell your lender to explain these to you. This is what I do on a daily basis. It kind of comes second nature to me. I even know sitting around the kitchen table, my husband and I get into heated arguments. So I'm going to get cut off here, Jane. Sorry. All right, quickly. Interest rates. Are we done? I would say pretty close. And so basically what's happened, and I've shot a quick market, this is what's happened. There's our inflation. We are at 7%. Our key market is 2%. So the question will be is, are we done or are we not? This would be the forecast of the overnight rate. So if you just look at the bottom there, we're right now at an overnight rate of 4.25%. We are looking now at a flat curve, according to Royal Bank economists. But I thought I'd share what every other bank is thinking. TD's pretty aggressive on there. They think that rates are going to decline quite rapidly. I'm not sure I would agree with that, but this is where we're sitting right now. Impact on cash flow. So I took a $1 million operating line. I took it at a year ago, 2.45%. Today's it's at 6.45%. That is prime lending. Okay. So if you're above prime, add that on. If you assume $2,000 replacements, $1 million buys you 500 head. If they're on feed for 120 days, your interest cost per head, $16. That was a year ago. Today's $42. These are real numbers. These are eating into your margin. One more thing, when we have larger impacts on we'll have impacts on larger amortizations. So the gist of this slide is if you borrowed $1 million a year ago, you probably have a 5-year rate at 2.35. If you borrow $1 million now, your 5-year rate's right around 5.75 to 6. Look at the difference in cash flow. You need $28,000 more a year on the same amount of debt, or you can only borrow 700,000 instead of that $1 million. And so when we talk about risk and strategy and looking at, you know, margins, these are real margins that we're going to have to live with. That in my mind, I think is here for at least the next year and a half of these higher interest rates. And so I'll just round off interest rate strategies. It's very, very individual to your farm. So consider, you know, variable and fixed. I would say, again, same as commodities, the more time you're renewing loans, you're going to get some highs, you're going to get some lows. So definitely talk to your lender about this. And that is the end of my presentation. So, and there's my contact information, and I look forward to the panel.